Good afternoon, happy Earth Day, and welcome to the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of the American Indian. My name is Jay Harrison, and I work with the Office of Community and Public Programs here at the museum. It's a busy day here in Washington, D.C. In observance of Earth Day, the museum is pleased to host an Earth Optimism Summit lecture featuring our own Dr. R. Douglas K. Herman. Doug is originally from Washington, D.C. He is the senior geographer for the National Museum of the American Indian. He earned his bachelor's degree in comparative religion from Dartmouth College, and both his master's degree and his doctorate in cultural geography from the University of Hawaii. His master's thesis, Mind and Earth, a Geography of Being, united his interests in philosophical and practical questions about being human. In 2000, Doug created Pacific Worlds, a web-based indigenous geography education project for Hawaii and the American Pacific that focuses on place-based indigenous cultural knowledge and understandings. His scholarship addresses the representation of indigenous cultures and the importance of indigenous knowledge in posing more sustainable approaches to human-environment relationships. His 2015 article, Traditional Knowledge in a Time of Crisis, Climate Change, Culture, and Communication, won one of the Smithsonian Secretary's Research Prizes. In 2013, Doug built his own outrigger canoe. In 2016, he served as a crew member aboard the Hōkūle voyaging canoe during the Chesapeake Bay leg of its worldwide voyage. Doug publishes and lectures on traditional oceanic navigation and what it teaches humanity about how to live on planet Earth. The title of Doug's program this afternoon is The Canoe, the Island, and the World, Lessons in Leadership and Management from Old Hawai. Following his program, ladies and gentlemen, we will allow for questions and answers. There's a microphone on a stand at the back of the auditorium. You're welcome to ask Dr. Herman questions. We encourage that. We do ask that you state your name, where you're from, and then pose your question to him. Ladies and gentlemen, how about a warm welcome to Dr. Herman today?
Mai ka'i a'oe. Aloha. Pretty good for a small crowd, and welcome. Happy Earth Day. Nice not to be out in the rain at this moment, I'm sure. As Jay mentioned, I served on crew aboard Hōkūle, which is right now winding up its worldwide voyage. And in honor of that and the topic of this presentation, the canoe, the island, the world, I'd like to open with the chant, which is the send-off chant for the voyaging canoe. It says, there's the canoe, there's the canoe, here it comes, there it goes. It's such a big canoe, you can't even feel the spray from the ocean. The navigator's so good, he can handle even the worst kind of weather. We move the canoe forward with the paddle and the bailer. Come land over here at this new land, go land over there at that new land, yay, here's the canoe. Ready? Words to that effect, written by Puakes from the Big Island. Aue wahiti e hokulea e, aue uahiti e. Hele ka vai ke kai e Hōkūle wa'ala ino e a ole puhi wa nui e, aue uahiti e. E lau hoi mai ka wa'a I ke ka, I ka hoi, I ke ka. E pai aku e ka aina la, e pai mai lai ka aina e, aue uahiti e. Happy Earth Day. As you know, there is ample evidence all around us that the management of human-environment relationships by the dominant society on this planet has brought a very huge imbalance. Climate change is the largest and most threatening of these indicators, followed perhaps by the crises facing our oceans. But even closer to home, We have levels of pollutants in our air, water, and soil that have reached a point where they're actually becoming incorporated into our bodies and are being found pretty much every place on the planet and in the foods we eat. Now, modernity has fostered an ideology of environmental exploitation that was hitherto unheard of and even anathema to most peoples on Earth. You go back just a few hundred years, 400 or 500 years, our ancestors were basically indigenous peoples somewhere, and they lived close to and working very strongly with the environment until we get into the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution. Then all of a sudden, nope, now it's time to just exploit it. I think our ancestors would be pretty horrified if they could see the mess that we have now. So today we are celebrating science, and that's a good thing. And science is a very, very useful and powerful set of tools. But it's just a set of tools. It does not tell us what we should do. It does not provide wisdom. Science can only monitor the data, make predictions based on current and possible future conditions, and then it's up to us to decide, well, what are we going to do? So really, when you get down to it, climate change and environmental issues are social and behavioral issues. It's about culture. And if we want to do something about it, this is sort of our contemporary culture here, we need to tackle it from the angle of culture, but using science, informed by science. Absolutely. So I'm suggesting that culturally we shift further in the direction of the wisdom of all of our ancestors, whose primary preoccupation was to ensure that there will always be enough. So you never take more than you need. You always make sure there's enough there to regenerate, and so forth. The traditional cultures of the world developed wisdom from careful observation and experience in places over many generations. And today, even scientists are coming to recognize that indigenous peoples' long-term relationships, this is a quote here, I gotta hold it up, long-term relationships with particular landscapes and ecological systems make their observations very useful, for their longitudinal time frame of study is not 5 or 10 years, but often 7 or more generations. Now, the problem that we tend to have when scientists get involved in indigenous knowledge is they're trying to fit indigenous knowledge into the Western scientific framework and the Enlightenment kind of thinking that we're stuck with, whereas in fact we need to be kind of going the other way and sort of fitting what we do and how we understand things into more of an indigenous framework of we're all connected, and that's what we're talking about here today. Because these traditional cultures produce wisdom to ensure survival. They embrace that we are part of the earth and dependent on it, and dependent on each other and all of the other nations of beings with whom we inhabit this planet. So you think towards the future and plan accordingly. You've perhaps heard the expression, thinking in terms of 7 generations. Can you imagine 7 generations from now? I can't. So really the best way to think about it is you're in the middle, you're thinking 3 generations back, and you're thinking 3 generations forward. A lot of times in indigenous cultures, the way the language says is basically the future is behind us. We look back to see the future. And it's just like navigating the canoe. You're looking forwards, but you can also look back to maintain your course. You have to know where you came from to know where you're going to. So my idea here today is to present some ideas from traditional Hawaiian culture. There's going to be a big Hawaii festival here in May that's going to focus on this topic, so come on back for that if you're able to. I wanted to see what these ideas can actually teach us about today. Now, the Hawaiian Islands is one of the most isolated archipelagos on the planet. There it is up at the top. The gray is what they call the Polynesian Triangle, so that's the whole area where it's the Polynesian culture and language group, minus a few outliers. It's about 2,300 miles from the nearest other islands and about 2,500 miles from the continental US. Is that a long way? So when you think about it, if you fly from here to California, flying to Hawaii is that much distance again. You could fit an entire other United States between California and Hawaii. It's really far out there. And when Polynesians arrived here about 1,000 years ago or more, we don't really know exactly, what they found was a very large archipelago of islands, very isolated, uninhabited. There were lush valleys, plentiful water, good reefs for fishing, as well as forests and dry areas providing a range of resources. So here is the Hawaiian Islands. Obviously, some of you are familiar with the Hawaiian Islands. I was greeted in Hawaiian when I came in. E komo mai, welcome. So up in the top left, Ni'ihau and Kauai, these are the oldest of the chain, because basically the Pacific plate is moving that way, and the magma underneath keeps popping up islands. So there's a new one down at the lower right. You can see a little point off the big island of Hawaii. That's Loihi coming up. And the ones at the far end are getting eroded and are very, very different kinds of landscapes. You get a wealth of different kinds of landscapes, from the very smooth, relatively smooth Big Island and East Maui, and to very eroded Kauai, and so forth. And the highest peaks on Hawaii Island rise up to about 14,000 feet, and you might know that they get snow on there sometimes in the winter. Here's an aerial view of Maui. So on the left, we have the very eroded West Maui Mountains, Pu'ukukui, the top, about 6,000 feet, one of the wettest places on Earth. Nobody knows what really is the wettest place on Earth, because who wants to hang out there and find out? But that's one of them. The top of Kauai is one of the others. And on the right, we have Haleakala, rising up to 10,000 feet, very sort of smooth, for the most part, volcano. So what you get out of this is a range of environments. And let's see what I got next. Here we go. So this is a consolidated map showing the vegetation, the native vegetation of the Hawaiian Islands. And you can see, just looking at the big island of Hawaii, you go from lowlands, scrub and grass, dry forest, rainforest, montane dry forest, subalpine forest, and up to alpine desert. This is a pretty wide cross-section of environments. You don't have that much on the lower islands, naturally, but then you also see a sort of distinct windward and leeward sides. The dark green on Oahu and Maui is on that side, and then it's drier on this side, same on Molokai. Kauai is a little bit different. So there's variation in the environments as you go around the islands. So initially, Polynesians would have settled in places like this. In fact, this is where they found one of the earliest settlements, Halava Valley on Molokai. I don't know if you can quite see it. It's pretty faint, but there's a waterfall in the back. Can you see it? Yep. Very gently sloping sides, nice valley floor. This would have been a major agricultural system in Old Hawaii. But as the population grew over hundreds of years or more, we eventually get people spreading out into even the drier parts of the island. This is Kauai High on the big island of Hawaii. It is the driest place in the Hawaiian Islands, and yet we have 2 Hawaiian temples here, including the one built by Kamehameha to unite the islands. So, given all this, Hawaiian chiefs around the 13th or 14th century, Mano Kalanipo and Kakuhiheva and a couple others, figured out, all right, we got to find a way to manage this in a way that everybody has enough, because that's really what it's all about. Everybody has what they need. And they came up with what we now call the moku ahupua'a system. Those are 2 words. You see the word moku up there in the top caption. Moku means something that is cut off, and in this case, if it's an island, it's cut off and surrounded by water. But there are also these divisions of the islands themselves, which are intended to basically be able to be self-sufficient if you're in the moku. And some of the islands you can see are small enough that they don't really warrant being divided up into moku. They are moku in and of themselves. Now, within these moku are finer slices, which we call ahupua'a. Yes, it is an awkward word. There it is. Ahu means altar, as in a religious altar, a stone altar. Pua'a is a pig. And there are stories about there would be a carved pig head on top of the altar. But basically where you'd find the altar is if you were going around the island on the coast, wherever you reach the border of an ahupua'a, that's where the altar would be. And at tax collecting time, the chief would do exactly that. He and his retinue would go around the island. It would take a long time. And at each ahupua'a marker, that's where the people would put their taxes, whether it's food or mats that they'd made or featherwork or carved bowls or whatever it is. We don't have any means of really accumulating income in Old Hawaii. There's no cash money or anything. There's no gold. Whatever you get, unless it's rocks, is going to rot. So wealth, the notion of wealth, which we'll come back to, is sort of a temporary idea. But that's where the term ahupua'a comes from. And these, as I said, they run from the mountains to the sea. Here they are on the island of Kauai. So the red lines designate the moku, and the yellow lines designate the ahupua'a. And they run from the mountains to the sea, so they sort of transect the vertical geography, and therefore they transect the environmental zones. So from the wettest places up on tops of the mountains, where the rainforest would be, down to the coastal area. And where the islands are drier, so here you see the south side, the moku that's called Kona here, right there, is much bigger than the other moku. That's because it's on the dry side. There's not as much resources there, and the ahupua'a are much bigger as well. There's just not as much there, whereas up on the north shore, or even on the Napali moku up there, you see that slices are pretty fine, because this is a very wet area, so there is a plenitude. Which brings us to this. The word for water in Hawaiian is vai, that's fresh water. Seawater is kai, very similar, but fresh water is vai. And it is often pointed out that when you duplicate vai, you get the word for wealth. And I put it in quotes here again because this is not wealth like money. This is wealth in a different sense. It's in terms of wealth in terms of productivity, in terms of surplus and bounty. So you can see that water is in fact what connects all of the zones and all the activities going on from way up the top down to the bottom. This is the ahupua'a of Haena on the island of Kauai, where I've been doing some research. And you can almost say that an ahupua'a is a watershed. It's pretty similar. They're not exactly watersheds, but they're pretty close to it. And any given Hawaiian extended family would have family members who are farmers and family members who are fishermen, and so that you can trade. People living in the uplands producing the agricultural goods trade with the fishermen down in the lowlands bringing in the fish. And this is a nice image showing one of the ahupua'a. This one looks like it's two valleys. You can see it's not just a watershed. In this case, it's sort of two watersheds, one that's a little drier than the other. The water is diverted from the streams, and we'll see how that works. And there's different areas of different kinds of productivity. We get down to the big agricultural land. And then you see this stone fish pond at the bottom. And so it's a complex system. Somebody's got to manage it. This is a much more complicated diagram. I'm not going to bother to walk through it, just to show how all the different ranges of activities that would take place from areas where you have the grass to thatch the houses, trails, temples, and so forth and so on. But you notice on the right side it says forest zone, agricultural zone, and coastal zone. Well, that's how I'm going to break it down today because I think that's pretty simple. So let's start at the top with the forest zones. What do you have? Well, you have the materials that you need for house building and canoe building. You have wood and you have fiber plants. You have a lot of medicinal plants. Now, there's medicinal plants in every zone, but there's, of course, going to be specific ones up in the forest area. Ceremonial plants for hula, for example, and for religious purposes. Bird catching. We'll see about the unique native birds of Hawaii. And these were used both for food and for feathers that were used for Hawaiian featherwork. This is a picture I took of a forest up on the Kohala Mountain on the island of Hawaii. You can see that it is not a very hospitable looking place. Hawaiians actually use the word wau, W-A-O. Wau means forest, and there's the wau kanaka, the forest that human beings can use, and above that is the wau akua, the forest of the gods. And that's the place that's so inhospitable and so weird and so different. It's just not human-friendly kind of place but it's very, very important, and you would do protocol before you go into the wauakua to make sure that you are pure. Here is a traditional Hawaiian house. You can see it is thatched with a particular kind of grass. But more importantly, in terms of the forest zones, you need the timbers to actually build the frame to thatch, to construct the house. Here is an old shot of a partially roughed out canoe hull up in the forest on the island of Hawaii, I'm sure. They would rough it out there and let it dry. The canoe is essentially a piece of the forest that you take out onto the ocean. I do a whole other talk on traditional canoe building, and one of the things in there is that the gods associated with the canoe and the canoe building are almost all forest gods. They're not ocean gods. It's the forest that makes the canoe. So they've roughed it out, they're letting it dry, season a bit, and then they'll come up and get it and finish it off. There are so many different plants that go into the making of even a simple canoe, whether they're for the coating on the outside of the hull, or glues, or fiber, or wood, or whatever. These are some of the medicinal plants, just a few, ones that the Hawaiians brought with them and others that are unique to the mountain areas in the Hawaiian Islands. There's quite a great deal of literature on Hawaiian medicinal healing. You have no doubt heard the word kahuna in your lifetime, yes? Yes. Okay, don't ever call anybody that. And don't ever say big kahuna. It's really not polite. Kahuna is basically somebody with a doctoral degree in Old Hawaii. That's what a kahuna is. Kahuna means expert. And there were canoe building kahuna, and astronomy kahuna, and house building kahuna, and there were kahuna who healed with medicinal plants, and these are known as the kahuna la'au lapa'au, and that's one of the most important kinds. In English, the word kahuna sort of became associated with the word priest. Westerners coming to Hawaii became very obsessed with Hawaiian sorcery. That's the kahuna ana ana. You don't want to mess with those guys. And so we get this word kahuna coming into English, but that's where it comes from, and now that you know better, you won't ever use it again, right? Unless in an appropriate manner. This is Manalani Mili Hokoana English Miss Aloha Hula 2013. Doesn't she look nice? She's got a lot of forest on, doesn't she? In fact, the goddess of the hula is a forest goddess as well. In fact, she's one of the same gods as the gods of canoe building. So hula is very much interconnected with botanical knowledge and use of the environment. There would be an altar in the hula school on which they would put fresh plants as offerings or recognition of the goddess. And so there's I took a couple of hula classes, and we were taken up into the forest, and we were chanted in, and we had to be mindful of the plants that we were picking and our relationship to the plants and so forth, then chant our way out to show respect to the place, and of course to take only what you need and make sure there's enough left behind. This is fundamental to learning hula. It's not just about dance. I mentioned the Hawaiian native birds. This is a photo from the collection over at the National Museum of Natural History across the way. Many of the native Hawaiian birds are extinct or heavily endangered due to the introduction of avian malaria in the 1800s, I believe. But these are the ones that they would use both for food and some of them for feathers, particularly the red feathers of the iiwi and some of the yellow feathers. Here are traditional capes worn by very, very high-ranking Hawaiian chiefs. These contain millions of feathers, because the feathers are only teeny tiny feathers. So you tie the teeny tiny feathers into little bunches, and you tie the little bunches onto this very fine mesh that holds them, and there you have them. Takes a decade or more to make one of these old style. This pure yellow one is the actual robe of Kamehameha the Great himself, who went for pure yellow. So that's the forest zones. Now we move down into the agricultural zones, where we get the cultivation of taro. This is the prominent crop of Hawaiian culture. It's the main food source. In fact, in Hawaiian culture, the word ai, A-I, with a little glottal stop in front of it, means food, or it means, you say mea ai, that's things to eat. Ai is to eat. Hawaiians of old would actually say sometimes, I have fish, but I don't have any ai. In other words, they're basically equating food to eat with the taro plant. So I have fish, but I still don't have food, is how that would translate, because you don't really have food unless you have the starch, and that is the main starch. But there was also bananas, sugar cane, sweet potatoes, and yams, and a range of other smaller and lesser crops, turmeric and so forth. Paper bark, which provided the clothing for Hawaiian people. Lauhala, one of the main fiber plants for making the mats and also the sails of the canoe. So a lot going on here. Some of these plants brought by the Polynesians when they arrived, and some of them not. This is taro. Most Americans, if you are Americans out there, are probably not familiar with taro, or particularly familiar with it. It's not something we eat. You can find it in the Korean grocery stores, however. It grows in standing water, as you see here. Or in this case, these guys sort of created these buns within a standing water pond. Same technology as rice cultivation. And when it matures here, we see a lovely big taro field. That's water. It looks like light green. That's because there's algae growing on top of the water. But that's basically a great big pond with all of this taro in it. And what this involves is water management, hydraulic engineering. So at the top here, we see a spring, a naturally occurring spring, and then you see they've cut a little channel coming through the spring, and we turn and look the other way, and we see it going along and feeding rows of taro ponds going down the hill. And there's another little channel that takes the water from one pond down to the next pond, and you can create quite enormous agricultural systems this way. Big or small, doesn't matter. And then the water eventually returns to the stream. So water management is going to be a huge matter here, because there's where you bathe in the stream has to be downhill from where you want to take your fresh water for drinking from the stream, and so forth and so on. So that's going to be a big management aspect right there. That is the taro corm itself. That is the part that you eat. It's very, very nutritious, very starchy. Hawaiians would pound it into a paste that we call poi, which I'm particularly fond of, but a lot of people are not, non-Hawaiians anyway. And all of this planting, of course, done in conjunction with a very sophisticated lunar calendar divided into 3 10-day weeks, if you want to call them, or anahulu. Moving now to our coastal zones, here's where we're going to find gathering on the reef, seaweeds, crabs, octopus, shellfish, things like that. Fishing itself, whether it's throw net fishing on the reef or fishing out in canoes. Coconuts would generally be growing on the shore because that's where they like it and that's where they tend to end up. The coconut tree is one of the most useful plants in the world. There are over 300 known uses for different parts of the coconut tree, whether it's food, fiber, water, medicine, wood, the list goes on. And then we're going to see our fish ponds. So here is my friend Emily Cadiz with my other friend Kali'i Alapai, and she has just scored her first octopus on the reef at Haena, and very pleased with herself she is. And you see that Kali'i is holding a throw net over his shoulder. So these are a couple of different kinds of the activities that you would find down here in the coastal zone. These are 6 of the 8 or more, or 10 or 12, I'm not really sure how many there are, edible seaweeds that grow in Hawaii. And these were a pretty important part of the diet. Of course, they're very high in iodine and other nutrients, and they're also very delicious. So they would use, like with Japanese food, you get a little bit of pickled something on the side. That's how it would be with Hawaiian food. Hawaiian diet's otherwise pretty bland, but you can add some of the seaweed to it or eat seaweed alongside of it, and makes it much more flavorful. There is our beautiful coconut tree. Now, this is an ahupua'a in which I've been doing work very recently, this year. This is the ahupua'a of He'eia on the island of Oahu. It's sort of on the backside of Honolulu, over the mountains. 2 valleys. There's the big one in the middle, and then there's another smaller one, shallower one to the right. This is one of those classic, lush, wet valleys that the Polynesians would have gone for immediately. What am I standing on? I'm standing on that. That's He'eia Fish Pond, or Paepaeo He'eia, 66 acres, 800 years old. So the fish pond is an ingenious and uniquely Hawaiian, this kind of fish pond. It's not found anywhere else in the Pacific Ocean. Ingenious mode of food production. The fish that you grow in here are going to be the herbivorous fish. I got a picture here, the ama, striped mullet, and the moi. These are your predominant fish, but let me go back to this picture here. You see that there is a gate there called a makaha, or makaha. And with the low tide, the water is flowing out of the gate, and then with the high tide, the water is going to flow back in through the gate. And there are several of these around the fish pond. And what this does is well, number one, keeps the water in the fish pond clean, but number two, it makes it a healthy ecosystem, because really, if you're a fish pond grower, as one of these guys at this pond said to me, he said he was over on the Big Island talking to a rancher, and the rancher said to him, you know, I don't really grow cattle. What I grow is grass. And then the cattle eat the grass, and then you have cattle, but it's growing the grass that is the important thing. Well, in the case of and he thought, aha, when it comes to the fish pond, what you really are farming is phytoplankton. That's what the fish eat. So you want a healthy environment that's producing a good amount of phytoplankton, and then you get your fish. You don't have to feed the herbivorous fish. There are some carnivorous fish in the pond. They always get a few in, and they will winnow out the weaker and the more sickly ones of the other fish, but there aren't so many that they deplete the stock. These ponds, I found this little quote here. Let's move past our juicy-looking fish. Covering up to 600 acres, they produced 400 to 600 pounds of fish per acre per year. So this is massive, massive food production. And there's our canoe, traditional Hawaiian fishing canoe, here on the Big Island. So all of this is going to require a lot of management. You've got a lot of people living in each land division. You've got the water to manage, you've got the land to manage, you've got the forest to manage, you've got the coastal resources to manage. This is going to take a lot of work. How are we going to do it? Well, our key person is called the Konohiki. And the Konohiki, sometimes that translates as land manager, but he or she is really the land and sea manager. It's kind of like having your forestry person and your fish and wildlife person and your agricultural extension agent all in one person. They're managing everything within that ahupua'a. So they allot the land and the livelihoods according to the skills of the people. If you're a bad farmer, why should you have a whole lot of farmland? Move you someplace else, have a small amount of farmland, and give the rest of the land to somebody else. If you're a lousy fisherman, then why should you be fishing? Maybe you should be farming, and so forth and so on. So they're monitoring all of these kind of things. The whole purpose, and I will say this over and over again, the whole purpose is to make the land fat. That's what we're trying to do here, is to make the land as productive as possible so that there's enough, in fact, more than enough for everybody. Because the more than enough goes to the chief, and then the chief's happy, the ruling chief. So the Konohiki ensures that all the residents obtain all the resources they need. If you need to build a house, you're going to need to cut some trees. Well, you don't just wander up into the forest and say, this one looks good. No, no, no. The Konohiki will take you up and select the trees that you're going to cut, because he or she is, again, also the forestry person. They're managing the forest so that it is sustainable. So they're monitoring the stocks of everything, fish, trees, plants, whatever, to avoid depletion and to avoid over-harvesting. And one of the tools that they have towards this end is to place a kapu on things. This is the word taboo. This is the Hawaiian version of the word taboo, and taboo is a Polynesian word. Fun facts to know and share. So a taboo is a prohibition in this case. You can't harvest them now until I say the kapu has been lifted. Penalty for breaking the kapu could be death. So you probably don't want to do that. Not necessarily, but it could be. And so when the Konohiki sees, okay, this kind of fish is spawning right now, kapu on catching that kind of fish. until they finish spawning. Then we can go back and start catching them. But you want to replenish the fish and so forth. Or if octopus is being depleted on the reef, okay, kapu on spearing octopus for a while until we see that it has regenerated. And as I said, or mentioned, suggested anyway, the Konohiki works for the chief who actually controls the ahupua'a. I almost said owns, but of course in traditional cultures there is no land ownership. You can't own land, land owns you. If anything, you just manage the land. You have it for a while and then somebody else is going to have it. It's not ever really yours. So let's just get down to our hierarchy of chiefs here, and this model is based on really post-Kamehameha Hawaii. Kamehameha united the whole archipelago in 1810, and so that sort of produced an overall level of management, which would be him, the mo'i, or paramount chief. And the paramount chief's job is to mediate on behalf of the people with the gods, because the gods are helping to make the land fat. Under the paramount chief would be the chiefs who control the different moku, either islands or big divisions of land. Whole islands if they're small islands. And there you see that word ai there. It says the chief, it's often translated as the chief who eats the island. I like to think of it as the chief who feeds the island, which I think is possibly more accurate. Then within the moku, you're going to have ahupua'a. So each ahupua'a is going to have its chief. A chief could have more than one ahupua'a, and under Kamehameha, chiefs had ahupua'a on different islands even. So that's the chief who eats or feeds the ahupua'a, and then under that person will be the Konohiki, and then we get down to the common people, the people who actually work the land. Now, I emphasize again, the main job of the chiefs working with their Konohiki is to make the lands fat. The great chiefs of Hawaii, the people like Mano Kalanipo and Kakuhiheva, Umi, Liloa, these guys were chiefs who reigned over periods of prosperity and abundance. That's when everybody's happy. Of course, the chiefs, you mostly remember the wartime chiefs because they did stuff, but whatever. The great chiefs were the peace chiefs and the productivity chiefs. Drought did happen in the Hawaiian Islands, and there's lots of stories of drought. So you need to be managing everything the best you can in order to deal with that and to take care of your people. So two things really, make the land fat and take care of your people. These two things go together. It's easier to take care of your people when the land is fat. So how you as a chief contend with these issues is going to shape the extent to which your people are loyal to you. If you're not a good chief, that is to say you're not making the land fat, the people are starting to go hungry, you got people doing the wrong kinds of jobs, things aren't working out, or the reef's getting overexploited, people aren't very happy. People start to leave. And same if you're abusive to your people and tax them too much and are stingy and so forth and so on. They don't have to stay there. They can go someplace else. So there are checks and balances in this system. Here's a picture of a council of chiefs, a painting by the late artist Herb Kauai Kane. So you see the ruling chief here in the very long feather cape, a lesser chief in a shorter cape, and other guys with their feather helmets. This is, I think the title of this painting is Council of War. But of course, what we're really about here is peace. We like to give it a chance. So, as I mentioned, so here is the ahupua'a on the island of Maui. People are not fixed. They can move somewhere else if they're not happy about it. Now, tax time comes at what's called in Hawaiian makahiki. Makahiki is the New Year's celebration. It's the time where the god Lono, who is the god of agriculture, rules the land, so it's a time of peace. After Lono comes the time of Ku, when war is okay, but during the time of Lono, war is not good. No, this is a time of peace and abundance. The banner on the left, the cross with the stuff hanging down it, is the symbol of the god Lono. And this is a drawing by Weber, who was on Captain Cook's voyage. So this is the first ever view of Hawaii and Hawaiian Islands. And they are boxing and wrestling matches and so forth going on. This is a time of games and competition. So the chief and his retinue come around the island. They stop at the ahu, the altar, And this is where the taxes are going to be brought, the food, the mats, the feather work, whatever it is. And there's going to be a period of feasting and games while the chief is there. He doesn't just take all the food and say, thank you very much. You give it back. Now, you have a big feast. You have a celebration. Yes, you're going to take some. But again, you don't want to be stingy here. You want the loyalty of your people. This is just some of the games, kinds of pieces, dart throwing and bowling and checkers and so forth and so on they would do during the makahiki. There's an ahu, and here's people bringing offerings, so this is what's going to happen at that time. Now imagine if these guys show up and you, the chief who runs the ahupua'a, don't have very much to put on the altar. Ooh, that doesn't look good. And so the ruling chief says, well, what's up with this? Where's all the produce? Your job is to make the land fat. Oh, well, one of two things happened. Either you weren't doing a very good job, or B, and people left because they didn't like you. What's going to happen to that chief? You're out of here. That's what. You're obviously not doing a good job. You're out of here. We put somebody else in charge who can do a better job than you. So these are the checks and balances in the system to make sure that good chiefs are there making the land fat and looking after the people. Now, who succeeds the chief upon his death? And this is where I think these guys were particularly brilliant. So here's a chief, and let's say those three guys sitting in front of him are his sons. What they did was they would send them out to different places in the archipelago to be raised apart from each other. So here in these new locations, these guys will grow up and have to manifest their chiefliness where they are with whom they're living amongst. Now, when the older chief dies, the sons have to contend for, okay, who's going to take over? Some of them might not be interested. Well, let's say at least two of them are interested. They got to fight it out if they can't come to an agreement. Now, who's going to win? Well, it could be this guy who seems to be all by himself, doesn't look very popular, or it could be this guy who seems to have some friends. So in other words, the chief who has the bigger army because he was a good chief. He made the land fat, he treated his people well, people looked up to him and said, we want this guy in the position of power. Whereas the other guy might not have been such a nice guy, might have been a little bit more of a jerk, and therefore couldn't raise enough people to follow him to fight the battle, and so he's going to lose. So I think this is a very ingenious way of making sure that the right person gets the job, rather than just pure heredity. So, it's kind of a natural selection model, in my opinion. Now, I want to remind us now that Polynesians are peoples of the canoe. We started out with the canoe chant, and when they arrived on the land, they basically took the values of the canoe. They've been traveling, months, or a month or more, 2,500 miles or so over open ocean on a small craft built with Stone Age technology. The same values and principles of surviving on the canoe apply to surviving on the land. So they sort of transferring this canoe model to the land model with these kind of views of management. And I'm going to give you 5 values associated with voyaging the canoe, the voyaging canoe, and life on small islands. And I'm going to suggest that these fit any group situation, anywhere, anytime, whether it's your sports team, your company, your household, whatever. Try this on, see if it works for you. First, let us remind ourselves that the settling of the island Pacific is the greatest human adventure of all time. Sailing mostly upwind across an ocean that covers 1/3 of the planet, finding tiny dots of land, marking in their minds where that tiny dot of land is, and then sailing back home, and then going back and forth across 2,000 miles or more of ocean. This in open double-hulled canoes built, as I said, with Stone Age technology, tools and materials, and they're doing this 1,000 years or more before Christopher Columbus. Is this good stuff or what? That's pretty good stuff. You all see the film Moana? It has its problems, but it's still pretty good stuff. Now, there's a almost cliched Hawaiian proverb that the canoe is an island, the island is a canoe. They're both limited vessels surrounded by water. And what you have there is all you have. I saw some people carrying signs saying there's no planet B. You know, what we have is all we have, right? So, how do you make it work? 5 core values, my recipe. Number 1, ike. This is knowledge. And for the canoe in particular, this is the incredible knowledge of navigation, translating observations of the stars at sea at different latitudes into a systematic teaching that has since evolved into this contemporary Hawaiian star compass. And there's more. You can't always see the stars, so you have to know how to read the swells. They identify 8 different swells in the ocean, and you have to know the feel of how the swells are rocking the canoe and then hold that to keep your direction. To me, this is the most amazing thing, far more amazing than navigating by the stars. Then, how do you find tiny dots of land? Magellan didn't do a very good job at it, sailed all the way across the Pacific and saw pretty much nothing. Those same waves, when they hit the islands, they bounce off. You need to know how to read the waves to know that there is land nearby. You need to know the birds that indicate that you are near land, and certain things about those birds you need to know. And then you have to know how to read the clouds. There are about 7 different ways, techniques of finding land that you can't see is there, and they're all very, very subtle techniques. Value number 2 is po'okela, which means the pursuit of excellence. As one culture keeper told me, if you're going to build a voyaging canoe that can go 2,500 miles and back, good enough is not good enough. It needs to be excellent. So these guys were making tools out of lava rocks to carve the canoe. They were taking coconut husks to produce the rope that held the craft together. And then breadfruit sap that they use as glue. And of course, I mentioned all the different plants that go into making even the smallest, simplest canoe. So this is both knowledge and skill. This is sort of the applied knowledge, the technology side of the knowledge, if you will. And they would be always pushing the envelope. So when you get to the Hawaiian voyaging canoes, they're quite different from the Samoan canoes of old and along the way. Now, the third and fourth terms are related, and in no particular order. The first one is kuleana, which is rights and responsibilities. This is kind of like talking about, that's my turf, right? When you say that's my turf, it's your area that it's your responsibility and people shouldn't be imposing on your turf. That's your turf. So you don't invade somebody else's turf. But it's also, you have the rights to it, but you also have the responsibility to manage your turf, to take care of it. So everybody on the canoe, whether you're the navigator or a crew member, everyone has to attend to their responsibilities. If you don't, if you're lazy, then the system starts to break down, and then people start to get resentful, and everything starts to get out of whack. In fact, there are a lot of proverbs in Hawaiian culture. Hawaiians believed that a 4-hour workday was a full day's work. You like that? I like that. That's all they needed. But, so the missionary guys come in and say, well, you guys are lazy. You should be working 8 hours. And they're like, why? And there's some funny stories about that. But the fact is that in Hawaiian culture, there are a lot of proverbs warning against laziness, criticizing laziness. That is a real big no-no, laziness. So that's kuleana. If you don't do your part, the system breaks down. We're all in the same boat. You have to do your part. Now, pono means to do it right, to do the right thing, correct action. An Aleut elder once glossed this for me as acting in harmony with all of creation. So when we say do the right thing, it's not just do the right thing, well, certainly not just do the right thing for you. It's do the right thing for the situation. What does the situation require to be done? Come on in. The situation might require that you take a hit. That's just how it is. And if you're pono, you're going to do that because that's what the situation requires. That's what it takes to keep the canoe afloat, if you were. So what pictures do I have here? Acting in harmony with all of creation, ritual and ceremony, people attending to their rank and station, and so forth. The fifth value, it's not really the last, but I'll call it the last, is mālama. This means to take care of or to nurture. If you're raising a child, you mālama that child. If you're a farmer, you mālama your fields, your crops. You make sure they have enough water. You make sure they have fertilizer. You make sure it has what it needs. That's mālama. It also, the word lama has to do with light, like moonlight and sunlight. So that which, bathes us, keeps us warm, makes the land fruitful. It's all of those kinds of things. Now, on the canoe, you have to manage what you have on the canoe because you have finite resources. You can catch a certain amount of fish on the way, but you also have to mālama the canoe itself. The great navigator Maupiailug, who taught all the Hōkūle navigators, used to say, on the canoe, the navigator is your father, the canoe is your mother. You listen to your father, you look after your mother. She's carrying you, she holds you. And of course, all of this works best if you have aloha, compassionate, loving kindness, the kind of love that you just feel radiating from people. It's not romantic love, it's a love of humanity. Here I am with my chief, Melvin David Lonokai Olohia Kalahiki, who's now bedridden and very unwell, but just such aloha coming from these kinds of folks. You feel it when you go to Hawaii, and the more you put it out, the more you get it back. So, if we want to deal with climate change, pollution, and the various environmental ills that are affecting us today, we have to understand that we are all in the same boat. And that boat is filling up with trash because we are not looking after it. It's time we replace the values of self-interest with the values of living and working together, and not just with our fellow humans, but with all the species, all the nations of beings with whom we inhabit the earth itself. We need to promote a culture that unites wisdom with science. Again, science is the tools, wisdom is the knowledge of how to use those tools in a way that is pono. To promote a culture that unites these two, if we don't, I think we are lost. We are at the moment to choose our direction right now. Do we want to be wise, or do we just kind of want to get along, good enough is good enough? It's the time to decide. And that's why we have the March on Science out there right now. Knowledge should be about putting our best values and practices forward, not about giving everyone the freedom and incentive to pursue their own self-interest at the expense of others. That's not indigenous thinking. Indigenous thinking is we look after the community as a whole. We make sure that there is always enough. And if the Anthropocene tells us anything, it's that the age of the individual is over. So, the earth is the island, is the canoe. Look after it, and it will look after you. Thank you. Jay's coming down with the microphone. We're asking that if you ask questions, that you do so in the microphone because this is being webcast and recorded, in case you didn't know.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Anyone have any questions for Dr. Herman? I would encourage any of you that might want to have a question for him about what he spoke about today. No questions, sir?
Harry Smith, Boston.
Welcome.
Where did you get the wood for the canoe you made, and what wood did you choose?
Okay, I actually, for the hull itself, I used what's called marine plywood, which I bought from Chesapeake Lightcraft in Annapolis, Maryland. I did not harvest a tree. But all the other parts of the canoe, the booms and the outrigger itself, and there are these sort of connecting sticks, I harvested from the forest. And with as much, some cases I found wood already cut, freshly cut, that I could use. And in one case I had to actually cut a tree, a live tree, which of course I felt bad about, but I was grateful to it.
Hi, my name is Kendra, and I'm from New Jersey. I've actually spent some time in Hōkūle Pier, which is close to where you're talking about. If you could give us like 3 examples of how we can bring aloha back to our own communities to start really kind of living more so like in like the indigenous way that you were talking about today, what would you give us examples to do?
3 examples of how to bring aloha back into your communities.
Back to New Jersey.
Back to New Jersey. Has it ever left New Jersey? I mean, seriously.
That's up for debate.
It's funny, I sent that picture of He'eia to a friend of mine when I was there, and I said, this is where I am right now, and he was in Boston, and he wrote back, nice, I haven't been to New Jersey for a long time. That's a very good question. You know, I think it starts at the most basic individual level. It starts with how you interact with other people. And it's the same stuff as Jesus taught and Buddha taught and Krishna taught. It's the same stuff. It's about not being selfish. It's about caring. It's about recognizing we are connected and then acting on that. So it's about what you do that helps you be who you are. Do you look after your pets? Do you look after the land that you live on and treat it and the non-human inhabitants of that land with respect? You know, I think once you start talking to plants and even rocks, then you start feeling aloha. That's kind of, you know, it really is, because you're feeling, you know, I have an herb bed in my backyard, and I go down and I always ask and say thank you when I take anything from those plants. So it's a matter of being sensitive and feeling it's really the golden rule. You know, would I want to be treated like that? How would I want to be treated? And you think of the best way you'd want to feel, and then you do that to the next person. I'll stop there. I think that's only 2. Thank you. Other questions? I see a hand over there. I can't really see with the lights. There we go.
I'm Judy Sedgman, and I'm currently from Bradenton, Florida. And I came here for the March on Science, but it was wet and cold, so I came to the Native American Museum to kind of warm up and dry out. And I have to say, it feels like this is also the March on Science.
Yes, it is.
It's very beautiful. And
Thank you.
And I have a very close friend who lives on the Big Island, and she's a haole, but she's married to a native Hawaiian. And he is one of the wisest people I've ever known. And he's so gentle, and he never sees, this is in answer to her question, but also about what you're just missing in this world. You don't see, he sees nothing that he wouldn't help if it looked like it needed help. I mean, he'll stop the car and check on an animal lingering by the side of the road to make sure it's okay. And, you know, I've learned a lot from just hanging out with them, but one of the things that I realize is that, you know, I work a lot with homeless people and with people that are in dire circumstances, and my friends make fun of me and say, well, why do you work with those people? They're the bottom of the barrel. You know, why would you bother with them? You know? And it breaks my heart, it really does, that we've lost that sense that we're all one. So I really just wanted to express appreciation for your talk and tell you that I'm very grateful that I came here. And I'm very grateful for what you're doing and for all the work of the Smithsonian, and I hope that it stays intact.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You know, Hawaiians really think about energy, the energy that we put out, whether it's verbal energy or just what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and that all objects receive that energy and become receptacles of energy. So, you know, there's a saying, for example, you don't talk stink around the poi bowl. When the bowl of poi is put on the table, everybody's dipping into it and eating. You don't talk negatively about anything, anyone, because that energy is going into the food and it's going into your mouth. And that's true with farming the food as well. You always make sure you're in a good frame of mind before you go into the taro patch. Otherwise, that negative energy is going into the taro. So once you start thinking like that, you say, well, what kind of energy am I putting out? And is that really what I want to be doing? They will thank inanimate objects. Kumuhula said to me, when she'd go to a restaurant with her family at the end of the meal, the kids would pat the table and go, "Thank you, table." I do that too now. And I thank my car all the time because it's the vessel that carries me. Other questions?
So I'm over here. My name is David from New Jersey. I'm this way, sorry.
There you are.
So you described how the society is run from chiefs on down. I'm curious, in modern Hawaii, is there any aspect of the government of the state of Hawaii that takes any of those principles into account, or is there any overlap whatsoever with the official state of Hawaii government with the way this is run?
I think the short answer would be no. You know, the pretty much government of Hawaii is modeled on state governments of anywhere else here in the United States. But the people you're dealing with are different and are going to expect different things. So, but, you know, politicians are politicians, I'm sorry to say it, you know. So they're not necessarily any better there than they are anywhere else, unfortunately. And, you know, you still have to vote. I mean, you have to be elected, which means you've got to win over the people somehow, but it's not the same as it was then. And as we know, you can win over people by making a whole lot of empty promises rather than by your actions. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head. Anyone else? Oh, there's one.
Hi, I'm Jimmy from Pennsylvania. Kind of piggybacking on what he was saying, how has Hawaii wrestled with technology and modernization? I've never been to Hawaii, so I was just wondering.
The thing about Hawaii is, again, you have a group of relatively small islands, and they're big by Pacific Island standards, but you have a group of islands, they're just islands. There's no way to sort of go to get away from anything, and you're really far away from everything else. And so everything has a pretty big immediate impact. It's not like being here on the continent where you feel like you're in, I mean, it's huge. I mean, all the way up to the Arctic Circle and, you know, down to Central America and beyond and so forth. We're on this really huge piece of land. And you can feel like, well, I don't know where my electricity is coming from or my food or my water. It's, you know, who knows, it's being shipped in from here, there, whatever. Doesn't really matter so long as it's there in the store. And of course, there's a certain amount of that in Hawaii as well. But there's also much more immediate results, negative results, if you do something negative on the land there because the place is pretty small. And there's a big impact. So what we see now is Hawaiians went through a renaissance in the late 60s and into the 70s. Hōkūle canoe was a big part of that. And now we have a whole lot of Hawaiians, native Hawaiians, who have advanced degrees, including PhDs, who are training in science, and then who are going and running fish ponds, or planting taro, or getting into food sovereignty, and so forth, or who are fighting against GMOs and the chemical spraying that goes with that. So because the impacts of everything are so much closer and more immediate, the response from the community can be much more powerful at the same time. So it will be interesting to see where things go. And of course, there's a very strong Native Hawaiian sovereignty movement as well. And it's going to be very interesting to see where that goes. Jay, how's our time? Okay. Other questions? There's one.
Lance Fujimoto, Los Angeles, California, via Lahaina, Maui. As passengers on this canoe and looking forward to the next 3 generations, what do you see as far as the aloha culture surviving in the next 3 generations? Do you have a positive view, or what do you think?
I think we all have to start by looking after where we are. Just like all politics is local, all conservation, all mālama and kuleana is local. Start with where you are, your own property, and then expand, to larger than that. Or if you have a kuleana that is bigger, if you have a company, a job, a farm, whatever, you look after that. If all farmers became green farmers, then we wouldn't have quite so much of the pollution problems. So that's what it takes, is for all of us to do that. And I think we're at a point now, excuse me, with climate change and with the Anthropocene, where we see more and more people coming to this conclusion, is that we can't not do it anymore, basically. There's no way to throw things away anymore. We're ending up with microbeads in our water supplies and in our bodies, and it's horrifying what the pollution has done and how it is getting into our bodies and our systems and our food supply and everything else on the planet. We got to start cleaning it up. So the fact that you guys are here listening to this talk is hopefully a positive step for you all in your lives to sort of think about it and decide, well, what else can I do? It always, every time I give this talk, it helps for me to think about what else can I do that I'm not doing that might make things better. And then we have to pressure our political figures to go in the directions we do. So, ergo the March for Science. We need to have our voices heard that, no, this unsustainable way is not the way we want to go. We'd like to have a planet that's livable in 3 generations from now. I have an 8.5-year-old son. I'm wondering what kind of world he's going to see when he's 40, for example, because I'm watching the climate change news pretty closely, and it's pretty scary all the time. So maybe more Americans need to be getting the news feed that I'm getting, which is pretty horrifying. So that's where we're at, and I think we can do it. I think the fact that we are having this March for Science and that you all are here is part of that positive movement.
Thank you. Mahalo.
Thank you. Did I see another hand?
Any more questions? One more question, maybe?
I'd like to end then with a little bit, another idea that I want to throw at you. I have another little talk that I actually have never really given to anybody. It's called Raising Tahiti. So when Nainoa Thompson, the navigator of the Hōkūle, was training under Maupialug for the 2nd voyage of Hōkūle, one morning Mau took him out to the end of the island of Oahu before dawn and said, okay, which direction is this island? Which direction is that island? So forth, so on. Which direction is Tahiti? Nainoa points in the direction of Tahiti, and Mau says, can you see the island? Well, no, not really. And Mau said, you need to be able to see the island. So, if you want to raise, so Pacific Islands talk about raising islands. When you're in the canoe, traveling from here to there, you know where you are? You're in the canoe. That's where you are. You're always in the canoe, right? So the Polynesians talk about the canoe standing still, you're pulling the island towards you, and gradually it slides up over the horizon, so they call it raising the island. It slides up over the horizon, and there it is. You have pulled it towards you. You can do that because you see the island. So you've kind of metaphorically thrown your hook, you've hooked the island, and now you're pulling it towards you. So that's raising an island. So the question is, what island do you want to raise? The island is the future. So what have you thrown your hook out? And what do you see and what are you pulling towards you? That's power. Go out and do it. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for attending today. It's been a fascinating lecture with Dr. Herman. We appreciate your time. If you're interested in what the museum is doing in terms of symposia like this, please go on our website, nmai.si.edu. We have a whole host of lectures and symposia and events here at the museum. And thank you for being here on an important day here in the nation's capital. Enjoy. Have another round of applause for Dr. Herman.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.